Hi, my name is Bill Cooper, and in this video we're going to demonstrate a Windows 10 deployment scenario using Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. It's going to be a multi-site deployment with a centralized configuration database. We're going to have a centralized management and monitoring place. We've got distributed deployment shares, and we're going to build this on top of Microsoft technologies. All of the servers in this deployment scenario will be Windows Server 2012 R2. We're going to be using Windows Deployment Services role, SQL Express 2012 with tools, the ADK for Windows 10, and MDT 2013 Update 2. Just an overview of what we're going to have here. We're going to have three separate sites, headquarters, branch site, and another branch site. In the headquarters we've got DCs, file servers, other servers, management server, and a deployment server. Each of the branch sites has a domain controller, a file server, and a management server. In the headquarters, the deployment server is going to have DFS replication, WDS, MDT, ADK, and SQL. The management server in the headquarters is running WSUS already. The management servers at the branch sites are already running WSUS, but we're going to add DFS replication and Windows deployment services. What we're going to be doing is configuring everything on the Darwin deployment server. That's where the database will be running. That's where all the configuration files will be loaded initially for each deployment, and the settings will be pulled from the database. At the branch sites, the management servers are just going to host a copy of the deployment share, which is going to be distributed using DFS replication, and they'll have WDS with a boot image installed so that clients on that site can boot from that Windows deployment services, get the right boot image, be directed up to here to the deployment server to pull the settings out of the database, and then off they go, getting the applications, operating system, drivers, and everything else from the local management server. Give an overview of what we've got going on in Hyper-V here, test lab that I've set up. We have three sites. We have the Darwin site, which has a bunch of servers, Perth site and Sydney site, which are both set up with domain controllers, file servers, management servers. So nothing too spectacular going on here. In the Active Directory, we have some organizational units set up here. We've got the main test lab OU, and then computers. We've got an OU for each site, and under each site they have desktops and they have laptops. There's also a sub OU for pool laptops which need specific settings, and we'll address those in the database. Moving on to the deployment server. This is a fresh server. I've run it up and joined it to the LAN. It's got an IP address, it's on the domain. I haven't installed any roles or anything else. So the first thing we're going to do on a deployment server is we're going to add some roles and features. What we need on this one is the Windows deployment services. We will also need DFS replication. Everything default there is fine. Let's get that installed. While that's installing, we can take this time to get the roles we need on the branch site servers as well. Perth management server, we're going to add roles. We need DFS replication and Windows deployment services. Okay, it's already got DFS replication, Windows deployment services. Thank you very much. All the defaults once again. And we will do the same thing for the Sydney management server. Oops. Okay, it's already got DFS replication. Add Windows deployment services. And we'll go back to our deployment server, which is now finished installing those roles that we needed. Next step on the deployment server, we're going to install SQL 2012. So I've already got the installation files downloaded here. SQL Express with tools, by the way. We need the Management Studio a couple of times during this procedure. We're going to do a new SQL Server installation. Alright, so obviously we'll accept the license terms. Just looking for updates. While it's looking for updates, we'll go back to Hyper-V Manager for a second. You might have noticed this ClearOS thing running at the top here. ClearOS is a software router. What I have is the Darwin, the Perth and the Sydney VMs are all on their own separate Hyper-V virtual networks. They're all subnetted separately, and they're all connected through this ClearOS router, which is a virtual router. It's basically acting as the router at each site, even though we've only got one of them. It just allows us to route the traffic between the different virtual networks. Okay, we can leave all the default settings here, but I am going to change to D drive. In this particular server, the C drive is quite small, so I've made a new D drive that's empty, and we're just going to put everything that we install onto the D drive. The default instance name is fine, we don't really need to change it. Put it on the D drive though. Now we do definitely want to have the SQL browser service automatic startup. We need the SQL browser service for this thing to work. I'm going to go into mixed mode. I'm going to set up a SA password. I've also got a domain security group that I've added for SQL administrators. Not that we'll use that, just something that I normally do. Can't break old habits. Double check the D drive, everything's good. Oh. And it's off and running. Okay, so SQL is finished installing successfully. The next step, we're going to install the ADK for Windows 10. We're going to move that over to the D drive. Now we don't need ACT, we don't need any of the rest of this junk. We just need deployment tools, WinPE, ICD and USMT. Even though we're not going to be using ICD or USMT in this demonstration, they're nice to have because occasionally you will need to use them. So we'll get that installed. Okay, the ADK is finished installing. Now we're going to also install MDT now as well. This is the update 2 version from December 2015, and we're going to move that over to the D drive. It's very small, it only takes a few seconds to install. Now that we've got all of the base applications needed to be installed, we're going to configure SQL. Let's go in and open up SQL Server Configuration Manager. What we need to do for the server network protocols, we need to enable TCP/IP. We want to configure that so it's listening on a particular port. So we'll turn off dynamic ports and we'll use 1433. Yep, we need to restart the server, that's fine. Restart SQL Server. While we're here, we can have a look at the properties of the SQL Server browser. Just make sure it's still running out of 90 shared. C drive, 90 shared SQL browser. We're going to make some firewall rules now. So let's go to Control Panel, Windows Firewall. Let's make some new incoming rules. We want a rule for the instance and we want a rule for the browser. So we'll do program rules. The instance is going to be on the D drive. SQL Server, Express, bin, SQL Server. I'm going to allow the connection and call it SQL Instance, SQL Express, in case we add more later. Now we need another rule for the browser service. Program rule again. This time it's in C drive, program files x86, SQL Server, 90 shared SQL browser. Allow the connection. We'll call this one SQL browser. So we've got our firewall rules done. Now because we're using TCP, we're not going to be able to use Windows authentication very easily. So we're going to SQL Server Management Studio. Connect to our SQL Express. Under Security Logins, we're going to add a new login. I'm going to make it an SQL Server Authentication login. It's going to be service.mdt build with a top secret password. we're going to use two accounts. We're going to have a build account which has access to the deployment share files and the database, and we're going to use a join account which has the ability to join the computers to the domain. We don't want any password policies, and we want user mapping. Well, we haven't actually created our database yet, so we can't do the user mapping just yet. We'll come back to that later. Let's get out of that for now. Okay, let's go into Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. Deployment Workbench is what we want. Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, Deployment Workbench. The first thing that we want to do is we want to make a new deployment share because we don't have one yet. We're going to put that on the D drive. Deployment share $ is going to be the path to it. That's no problem. We don't want to ask for anything. It's going to be automated. Great, we've got a deployment share. Now we also want to set up the database as well. So go to database, go new database, SQL server name is our deployment server in Darwin, SQL Express, port 1433, and we're using TCP sockets. We're going to create a new database, MDT DB, why not? SQL share, we'll just put deployment share $. If you read the text, it says it just maps a drive to this to keep the connection going to the server. Alright, so we've got MDT deployment share and we've got the database. Let's close this off for a minute. We'll go back into SQL Management Studio now. I'm going to go back to that login that we created, MDT build. Under user mapping for the MDT database, we're going to give it data reader so it can read the settings from that database. The other thing we want to do is we're going to extend the database a little bit, because by default there are a few settings that you would put in the custom settings file, and I would rather have them in the database if possible. So if we go into databases, MDTDB, tables, dbo.settings, columns. What we want to do is we want to add some new columns. So the first column we want to add is deployment type. Now we want these to be NVR cars, and the length can be 255. Deploy route, same again, NVR car, and we probably want that to be fairly long as well. We want event service, NVR car, 50 will be fine for that, and hide shell. 50 is more than enough for that. So we've added 4 columns to the database: deployment type, deploy route, event service, and hide shell. We'll save this. What we want to do now is update the database views. So we're going to do a new query. I'm going to find my little script that I have here ready to go. It's basically executing a refresh view on different tables: computer settings, location, make, model, and role settings. So let's execute that. Completed successfully. We're finished in the SQL Studio. We shouldn't have to come back in here again. And it crashes. SQL does that sometimes. Okay, the next step before we forget, we need to configure our Windows Deployment Services role that we've installed. Configure server, integrated with AD, change this to D drive, respond to all client computers, and we don't want to add any images to the server. All we're ever going to do in WDS is add a boot image once we've created it from MDT. So we're finished in here for now. We'll close that off. On the D drive we've got our deployment share. I'm going to add a new folder called deployment logs. We're going to share that out so that everyone has access to that. They can write their log files there. Deployment logs $ actually. Give everyone full control, and in the security, give everyone full control. The settings for the deployment share, we need to actually make some user accounts and stuff first. What I'll do for a minute, we'll swap over to our management server, which is where we've got all the AD roles and everything. Under services, we're going to make 2 new accounts. First one is going to be our MDT build account. Top secret password. Password never expires. User can't change password. Another new user. I'm going to do service.mdt join. Top secret password. Now we need to make some groups. I'm going to make a folder access group. This is going to be test DWN DS01 deployment share, and it's going to give read access. We're also going to make a new global group. We're just going to call it no logon rights. We'll see what we do with that in a minute. And we're going to make another group, a security group, for allowing users, computers to be added to the domain. So we'll call this one AD computer account admin. Now in our computers OU, where we want this MDT join account to be able to create computers, we're going to modify the security settings. Go advanced. We're going to add that new security group that I just created, the AD computer account admins. We want them to read and write all properties, and we want them to create and delete computer objects. Hit OK, and OK, and OK. Now the user accounts that we just made before, we need to put them into specific groups. So the MDT build needs to be a member of that folder group we created to give it access to that. We're also going to add it to the no logon rights, and we're going to set that as the primary group and remove it from domain users so it can't even log on to a computer. All it can do is access the deployment share. And because we're going to be, we have already created the SQL user with the same username and password, we're going to be able to use the same credentials to log on to SQL, just not in the domain way of things. So that's MDT build. MDT join, similar thing again, we add them to no logon. We also add them to that security group for AD computer account administrators. Set no logon as a primary group and remove domain users. So all this account can do is add computers to the domain. The password for the MDT build account is going to be obfuscated in the configuration files, and the password for the MDT join is going to be in the database. Even if people unobfuscate this password and use it to read the database to get this password, it's still not going to really let them do much in the environment. So we only give them the minimum amount of privileges that they actually need. So now we've got those accounts created over on the D drive. Oops, wrong server. We'll go back to our deployment server. D drive deployment share. We need to give that account we created privileges to read this. And it's done some balked things here. What has it done? Okay, so we need to add it here firstly so they can actually get access to the share in read mode, and we need to add it onto the security settings. And we don't even have access to this, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, they can read this folder, subfolders. In fact, why don't we add ourselves to the list while we're here? It's just annoying. Give ourselves full control, and let's give domain admins full control as well. Why not? Trust them. Okay, we can get into there now. Very good. So we've configured WDS, we've created a deployment share, deployment logs, we've set the security on them. What we need to do next is we're going to add a folder called extra files. Now you could put that anywhere, but to save someone else accidentally deleting it, I'm going to put it inside the Deployment Toolkit folder. I'm going to call this extra files, and in extra files we're going to make a folder called deploy, and in deploy we're going to make a folder called scripts. What we're going to do is we're going to put the DecodeExit Script into the scripts folder so it gets copied into the boot image. We'll show you what we do with that a little bit later, but let's copy the files first. DecodeExit Script. And there was also a custom background image that I have here as well, which we're going to chuck into extra files somewhere and deploy perhaps. So that's D drive, program files, Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, extra files, deploy, and then scripts. And we're going to use these in the bootstrap file to obfuscate the password. I'll show you how that works soon. And in fact, this video is already up to the 20-minute mark, so we'll stop that for the first video. We've configured the roles and the applications that we need. We've created a deployment share, we've configured SQL, we've made a log share, we've set up an extra files folder with our DecodeExit Script files, and we've copied a custom background image that we can use when we're setting it up. We'll stop the video for now, and in the next video we'll start configuring the MDT. Thank you.